Just a heads up, while our usual episodes are intended for adults, tweens, and teen audiences, this episode addresses more mature topics, including discussion of sexual practices. I recommend that adults listen to this episode alone to decide which parts, if any, would be appropriate to share with older teens in your life.
Hello, I'm Delaney Ruston, physician and the creator of the 3 Screenagers movies, and this is the Screenagers podcast. What we're going to talk about today is shocking, though not altogether surprising. We live in a world where young people are seeing highly sexualized content, unlike anything youth were exposed to in the past, via online pornography, intense shows, social media, etc. And there are repercussions, one of which is a subject of today's episode, and that is the fact that some teens and young adults are taking part in choking someone or being choked in sexual encounters. And of course, adults can do this and are doing this too, but I'm really focused on young people. This choking can be light pressure on the neck or more than that. And the idea is that it can be arousing. I have heard from many young people about this. In fact, just recently I spoke with one young adult who was completely surprised when I said that this was not a thing that was happening when I was their age. They thought this had always been the norm. And how did we get here? BDSM hit mainstream media forcefully with 50 Shades of Grey, which many teens have watched all 3 films. And then there's the HBO series Euphoria, rated for 18 years and older, but I can't tell you the number of 12 and 13-year-olds who I've spoken to have seen it, particularly girls. And it has choking in it, and one of the characters is into BDSM. There are many other examples, such as singer Rihanna's song called S&M, with its accompanying explicit music video. These are just a few examples. Today I sit down with New York Times bestselling author Peggy Orenstein. She's been interviewing young people about sex-related topics for several decades. She's the author of Girls and Sex and Boys and Sex, among other books. Her work has helped to draw needed attention to the ways pornography and popular media can impact attitudes and behaviors around sexual encounters, including normalizing sexual practices that can be risky and painful, like what we're going to talk about today. Peggy recently had an extensive article in the New York Times titled "The Troubling Trend in Teenage Sex," and it's about the pervasiveness of choking, which is also referred to as sexual strangulation. Today, Peggy and I talk about what is happening and how we can address this. And we will also hear from a 19-year-old girl who shared some thoughts with me on this. I start by asking Peggy when she first heard about choking.
You know, this was something that I started seeing, about 5 years ago, I guess. I was talking to a group of boys, sophomores in high school at a private school. And one of them raised his hand and said, "Why do girls want to be strangled?" They use the word choke, but it's really strangulation. And I thought, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And then in the next class with the girls, they said, "Why do all boys want to choke you?" And I thought, what?
Yeah.
And then I started asking the young people that I know and that I interview, and one of them actually said to me, who was at Stanford, said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." And then that very night went back to her dorm and her roommate was crying. And somebody had done this to her. And she called me up and said, "That's weird."
I want to dive into this tricky topic. You and I have sat around your dining room table and talked about sexual strangulation, choking. What is this?
It is hands on throats, and often it's a light repeated pressing, although the research is showing that it's getting to be more intense. But it is largely a behavior where girls are the targets or the recipients of that behavior. Girls, straight or bisexual girls, and also gender diverse students. Boys too, but much less so.
As the receiver.
As the recipient, yeah.
And the idea of it is that with less oxygen to the brain, there's some kind of heightened arousal.
Yeah, and it's a theory. It's not true. The girls have said there's an adrenaline rush. One girl said, well, I've heard that it enhances feelings. And I said, you know what else enhances feelings? Knowing where the clitoris is. That would enhance feelings.
Absolutely.
But it's not just during sex is the thing. It's becoming something that's really, it's a normalized practice. Girls are saying that it's happening when they're making out. It often happens non-consensually, but not always, or quasi-consensually. Girls are kind of like, well, I guess it's okay, but they don't name it as assault.
Yeah.
But
And let's just say for a moment, some reasons that some girls would and boys say they would do it. You've written about this, like maybe college age, have said things like, well, I like feeling vulnerable, or the flip side, this idea of, oh, you're just vanilla if you don't do it. You're not being cool. And as a guy, kind of like people are talking about it, I better try it. She maybe wants it. So I just think it's important for us to say, kind of understanding that language of why it's kind of out there.
Yeah.
And one of the things I want to make sure we say is data, because that's such a powerful way to, in a calm voice, talk with young people in our life. And the survey about the 5,000 college students, can you speak to that?
Yeah, Debbie Herbenek has been doing annual surveys of college students. She is probably the foremost researcher on American sexual behavior. And her research has also been replicated in national surveys that go beyond just a college population, as well as international surveys. But she has been surveying college students at a major Midwestern university every year and has seen the rates of those who report choking or having been choked skyrocket, and particularly among girls, so that it was 2/3 of girls had experienced choking in her most recent survey. And the rate of those who had experienced that for the first time between the ages of 12 and 17 had gone from 1 in 4 to 40%. So that was enormous. And by the way, 85% of the girls said that they had experienced some act of rough sex.
And then was she asking about sexual pleasure during those?
Yeah, she did some follow-up individual interviews. There's one that I loved that she actually did with a boy where he was talking about sexually strangling his partner. And he did it because he wanted to give her pleasure. And Debbie said, well, have you ever thought about using a vibrator? And he sort of backed up and went like, why would I do that? And she said, well, because you'd have a much better chance of producing orgasm without risking, death.
But what is so relevant, the reason we're talking about this, because everything's a click away for these young people, and then we don't have conversations like this, like, give me a break. But it is, you said in the article, and it's what I've experienced, is when I talk to college and even older high school kids about this, they will nod their head that they know this is a thing.
Yeah.
It is everywhere. If you don't believe me, go talk to your teens, mention it. Many of them will say they've heard of it and they know that in the realm. Can you just say a little bit about how this has come to spread so wildly?
Yeah. Well, you know so well from your work the impact that media has on us. And our kids are growing up in a world where they are bombarded, steeped, saturated with media, including sexually explicit media. And so this was originally something that kind of rose up and became more common in pornography, but it jumped the shark so long ago. At this point, you don't need to have watched pornography or have any exposure to pornography to see this, because it seems to be that it went from there. The first instance was in Californication, 50 Shades of Grey. By 2019, which was when I started seeing it, it was really starting to be normalized. It was in Euphoria. It was in The Idol. Ali Wong talks about it. Tina Fey uses it as kind of a punchline in the trailer of the new Mean Girls, if you watch that.
And young people aren't just seeing it normalized in pornography and movies and shows, but also things like the books they read. For example, the country's best-selling romance writer, Colleen Hoover, whose core audience includes teenage girls and young women, has an eroticized choking scene in her most popular book. When I talked to a 19-year-old college girl recently, she said it's hard to avoid all of this.
And now it's became like a thing where all of these like weird young adult novels that show all of this like erotica are like fetishizing it. And it has these men or boys that are watching these weird ass video games that have way too much violence. And then the girls are reading these books thinking that it's totally okay.
Kids might very well not be searching out any of this material, but social media will push things into their social media feeds. They will get clips from Euphoria into their Instagram, for example. And guys in particular tell me that they often get posts from a site called
OnlyFans,
which is a platform where people create and sell sex videos and interact in sexual ways with people.
And that's the other thing about us parents, because we used to say for a previous generation of kids, watch their media with them, but we can't really do that anymore. That's not useful advice. So you don't know that your kid is being pumped this stuff, or that one of the popular things for girls is like, if there's like a hot celebrity or a hot guy, hashtag choke me daddy. Like, he's so hot, I want him to choke me. But the choke me memes, the how-tos, the misinformation about its safety, the normalization of it is ubiquitous on social media and YouTube. And there are surveys, research surveys that have been TikTok, that they've been looking at how that has been spreading on those platforms.
Exactly. And the shocking thing is that social media, YouTube, websites talk about how to do it and disinformation and whatnot, and that the algorithms actually can be sending this over social media to our teens, and that it's not being blocked yet.
How do we demand this accountability? And one of the things is that, they are trying to stop social media defeating how to do suicide. They are trying to stop the stuff that talks about glamorizing eating disorders and how to do your eating disorder. They need to stop this. They can, or they can at least drastically reduce it. It is harmful. It is hurting our children. What we know about that is that, first of all, there is no safe way to do it. And there's all of this social media and mainstream media, Men's Health, Cosmopolitan, these magazine online profiles that tell you that if you just do it this way, if you just do the sides of the neck, if you only do it lightly, but there's a robust field of studies and information and data on strangulation. We know how strangulation works. We know what it does to the brain. And what we're seeing is the emerging research that it is causing kinds of brain damage visible on MRIs, but not yet something that would interfere necessarily until much later in life. So, for instance, girls who have been choked multiple times compared to girls who have never been choked have less cortical folding in their brain. They have to recruit more of their brain to do simple memory tasks, which they don't notice yet, but may affect them when they're older. There is also a skewing of the hemispheres of the brain that is reflective of people who have mood disorders. And while we don't know how much is chicken or egg or how much it contributes, but we do know that young women who have been repeatedly choked are far more likely to have had recent episodes of depression and or anxiety. And I think for kids that's a really good place to enter, because I think they do care about depression and anxiety right now a lot. But one of the things that I thought about that I hadn't really mulled so much before I wrote this, but was how many of these recent sexual trends, and particularly the rough sex trends that are aimed at women, or that young women, the recipients, not only not produce orgasm, but they're often above the waist. When you're talking about hair pulling, when you're talking about spitting, when you're talking about name calling, when you're talking about sexual strangulation, they're acts of aggression, eroticized aggression, that girls are much more likely to be recipients of, whereas the trends that come up for boys, like disproportionately receiving oral sex, are much less aggressive and much more likely to produce pleasure and orgasm.
Mm-hmm. For the male.
For the male.
So how to talk with our teens and young adults about these things? We mentioned earlier about the important approach of sharing research findings as one inroad. Here is Peggy about how key it is to talk about what we hope for rather than only say our fears and concerns.
So in an overarching way, Delaney, my hope, what I've been trying to do with my work, is to embed these in a larger conversation that we are not having, that we desperately need to have, even though we don't have the language for it, that's about positive, healthy, connected, loving, mutual, caring sexuality and treatment of your partner, whether your relationship with that partner lasts for 5 minutes or 50 years. So to enter into this conversation on these scary topics is really hard. And ideally, we're doing that in the context of, we want you to have a great sex life. We want our kids to have that. It is a wonderful, joyous, humane thing.
in an appropriate way at the right age and all of that
in
way.
an appropriate
Yeah.
way at the right age, whenever that you believe that they should engage in it. If you think that your child should wait until they are legally married, God bless, but still you want them to be in a positive, healthy, joyous relationship. And all these things get in the way. But our long game, we have to remember, is that it's not just, I think as a parent, it's so easy to operate from danger, fear, and risk. And while that is important, I want to encourage people to put this larger frame on it.
And I want to expand the spectrum to say, when we say sex life, we are talking anywhere from hand holding and kissing all the way.
And I love that you say that, because that's, when you aren't on that script, you can find so many other ways to create intimacy and sexual pleasure.
I like your idea of starting the conversations. Like, we want positive in your life.
Yeah, but it's really important for parents not to have these conversations only about risk and danger. And I know that the parents are probably thinking, oh my God, I've got to go talk to my kid about choking right this very second. Take a breath, and always asking in ways that are not, too pointed or prying, but sort of like, gee, I was listening to this podcast today about this, and I wonder what you think. Trying to help them be experts in their own experience always, I think.
Or not their personal experience, but just what they're seeing.
And that's the next thing I was going to say. Do you see this among your friends?
Or in the media? Have you ever seen it in a show?
Or in the media, or people that and not doing a sort of like bright light interrogation, but maybe when you're in the car or taking a walk or doing something where you're not looking face to face, or to say, a friend of mine's child was asking about this, and she's wondering how to talk to her about it. And I wonder what you think would be the most effective way to do that.
Ooh, I like that.
So that you're always trying to sort of let them think about it out loud, let them come to terms with it, not telling them, but trying to engage them with them having some power in the situation to come to some conclusions.
And here's the thing you and I got heated on, because what I hear consistently from young adults and older teens when I bring up my concerns about these riskier sexual practices, I've been shocked to get a pushback that is, no, don't kink shame or don't shame people, whatever people want to do. And I was like, okay. And you and I talked about how having these conversations and having all this data we've dived into today is so important, that they can over time be thinking about how this is being sold with things like these shows that are highly popular, like Call Me Daddy, where it's giving the messages that you're cool girl if you just own your sexuality and like kind of do whatever you want. Let's just step back. Let's see, what are those messages? And is it promoting kind of just casual sex that young people, many of them, don't actually want? We know by the data. Having these conversations so that they can think critically about things and have their opinions about things is a good thing.
I think that there's a lot of performative sex positivity that particularly girls feel pressured by. And I had a conversation after the choking piece came out with a girl who said, nobody ever said to me that sex positivity could mean I don't want to do this, or I don't want to have this many sexual partners. It meant that you had to always be down for whatever. And then if you said no to something, that made you prude, or that made you kink shaming. And when my piece came out, I got some of that from young women who said, well, at least she doesn't BDSM shame. And I thought, really, I have to say that in order for you to hear that something's going to give you brain damage? Or one girl who said, I do like being choked. And I said, well, okay, and you can make a choice to do that, but understand that's like saying, I like heroin. A lot of people like heroin, and they're risking their lives when they use it, and they're risking their health when they use it. So parents can also say to their teenagers, if what you're interested in is being adventurous or appearing adventurous or exploring kink, there are many ways to do that that are safe with somebody that you trust, where you have very clear boundaries and have had clear conversation. I mean, the other thing is with the strangulation, one of the things that Debbie found was that 25% had somebody sexually strangle them whom they had met that day and had sex with the first time that day. And often in those cases, alcohol was involved, and that is just not safe. And I'm not judging people's, desire to have a one-off or whatever, but that is a practice that is risking your life.
And that's not the only risk. Those doing the choking can risk being charged with assault, especially if they haven't asked for or gotten consent. But even if they have and things go awry or things change for the person receiving it, then there's the emotional risk or fallout for the recipient. I know of a college student who hooked up with a guy she met on an app where they were making out, and then he did that maneuver on her. She was so distressed by the experience that she ended up taking time off from college.
Not a good idea. For people who are not good at communicating, young people who are just learning sex, who are not good at communicating. So saying, let's put this one aside because it is just too risky. It's just too easy to kill somebody or harm them.
When I talk with teens about all this, about choking and rough sexual practices, I hear varying views, and many get defensive if adults try to weigh in on things, saying that adults are being judgy, kink shaming, and that it's not our business. And yet, the key is we have to get this uncomfortable topic out into the open. There are risks, and this is a serious matter. Having young adults speak out about their concerns of choking is a thing that I would love to have happen more. Let's hear from the 19-year-old that spoke earlier in the episode about what she tells her friends about choking.
And I've talked about it with my friends where I'm like, if you like your boyfriend or the person that you're having sex with to choke you, that is weird. And especially if they're like insisting on it, you need to get out of whatever situation that you're in. You need to run, because if they like to do that, like intimately, that's not a good sign. Okay. Like if that's what gets them like excited, that is not okay.
That is really powerful. And what do your girlfriends say? Have some say they like it? Or
some of them are like, oh, well, I think it's fine. Like if they ask, I'm like, no, I think it's weird either way.
And good to have you as an advocate. So it's come up a couple times in college.
I don't know. I think a lot of my friends look up to me. So especially like if they're like, do you really think that's weird? I'm like, yeah, don't let him do that. That's strange. And they're like, yeah, because literally all they need is someone to talk to. And you're not going to really talk to like a therapist. You're not going to be like, my boyfriend's choking me, like that kind of thing. And so especially friends, if you have like one or two friends that are informed on it, and especially ones that are pretty confident in being like, yeah, that's screwed up. I would never let a man do that to me. And they're like, wow, really? I'm like, ain't no way. Mm-hmm. That's all it really takes. Because they're like, yeah, I guess that's kind of weird. I'm like, think about where the origins of that are. Strangling women, violence against women, that's weird. Men should not like to make you feel like they're your prey.
I would love young people to hear what she just said. What is clear is that our youth get a lot of the other messages, worrisome messages from the media all the time.
I mean, I do hear this from girls that you're trying to be kind of like the cool girl. And then, sex becomes almost like something that you're showing you can endure. Like, yeah, bring it on. I'll show you. I can do that. Rather than something that you're enjoying or communicating.
And going at a pace that you want to, both for male and females, and anybody who self-identifies as a they, whoever the individual is, thinking about what pace feels good to them is what we never see in the media. So little of that.
I mean, it's so ubiquitous in all media that they're getting it now. It's just part of the script. And we somehow think that if we just don't talk about it, they'll either figure it out or they won't do it. And we just don't have that luxury anymore. This is not the world that you and I grew up in anymore. If we don't talk to our children clearly and explicitly, the media will educate them for us. And this is the result of that.
Well, Peggy, I know what we've talked about today is really going to help a lot of people. I just feel so glad we did it.
I feel always like I have to, when somebody comes up to me now and says they've read that choking piece, I'm like, my first response is, I'm sorry. I had to put that on. Somebody stopped me next to the broccoli in the market yesterday and wanted to talk about it. I just thought, oh. But I'm glad that it's having an impact. And I really hope that this and that your amplification of it and the work that you're doing will do the good I know that it can do.
Oh, thank you. And we have seen other trends and other things like this pass. We have to give hope that we do have agency and these things can get better.
I was glad that Peggy actually mentioned some books that she recommends to help have these challenging conversations with youth in our lives.
Debbie Herbenik's book, Yes, Your Kid, is a fantastic book about how to talk to your kid about sex and includes a chapter on talking about rough sex. And she does it really beautifully. So that's a wonderful book. Shafia Zaloom's book, Sex, Teens, and Everything in Between. And then just as a sort of book to sort of understand that sort of cool girl mentality thing, Tracy Clark Fleury's memoir, Want Me. She's like sort of an old millennial. So it was sort of at the beginning edge of the sort of social media or online experience for young people and the impact that it had on her as somebody who had to kind of come to terms eventually with what she was doing that was performative and what was authentic to her. And that, I think she's a really interesting memoir.
Thanks for listening today. And please follow the Screenagers podcast, which is the same thing as subscribing. And rate and review it if you have a minute. This really helps spread the word. We have show notes at screenagersmovie.com, where you can also learn about our 3 Screenagers movies, sign up for my weekly blog about parenting, and search topics of hundreds of past blogs. Meanwhile, we'd love to hear your ideas for future podcast episodes. Email me at delaney@screenagersmovie.com. This Screenagers podcast episode was produced by me, your host, Delaney Ruston, Lisa Tabb, Bridget McCarthy, and our sound editor was Alan Gofinski.